was a terrific panel to start us off with, and we're gonna go right into our panel 2 where we're gonna be discussing and looking back on the 1984 conference that Mrs. Ford convened right here, discussing the private lives and public duties of First Ladies. And joining me on stage are Nancy Kegan Smith, Stacy Cordery, and Susan Ford Bales. Nancy, we've already heard your biography, but Stacy is a history professor who has had a long scholarly interest in First Ladies, so much so that she now teaches a course on the subject at Iowa State University. She's a Flair board member and has also served as a bibliographer for the National First Ladies Library, and she has a new book on Elizabeth Arden coming out this fall. And then Susan Ford Bales really needs little introduction, but just, you know.
What about Greg Ford?
Well, yeah, there we go.
Gotcha.
But as we know, Susan was here in 1984 with her mother for the First Ladies Conference. She helped her mother launch the National Breast Cancer Awareness Month. She's since served as a national spokesperson for breast cancer awareness, and she currently serves on the board of the directors of the Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation. So, welcome to my panelists here, and we're actually just going to go ahead and get started with Nancy, who has some incredible audiovisual work. I do want to note the terrific work of the archival staff at the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Library, many of whom are here now. They located this footage in our archives and digitized it so that we can make it available today. Their work is the epitome of what Liz Carpenter said at this conference in 1984, when she said, "I really think these presidential libraries that have the papers of First Ladies and the women in their administrations really have a gold mine, because the story of the American woman in or out of the White House has been very undercovered." And with that, I'm going to turn it to Nancy.
Before I go to the podium, I just want to say, Brooke and Geyer and Elizabeth, when I first mentioned this to Geyer, the audiovisual for the conference was not in a permanent state of preservation. So it had to be sent back to the Washington National Archives lab. And that was 40 years later, it was just sitting there. First we had to find it, then we found it, and then it was preserved. So it's going to be like drum roll, when you see it. But I'm going to set up the conference just a little bit because it was such a special conference. But I'm ever so excited for you to see the actual footage. And this mic keeps going in weird directions. Anyway, April 18th, 19th, and the 20th of 1984, you have the historic conference on First Ladies, which was convened at the Ford Museum. What was I doing? I was an archivist at the Johnson Library, and I was supposed to help from behind the scenes, but I didn't get to go. The background on the conference is, let me give you just a little background. Dr. Lewis Gould, who you've heard his name mentioned, really was the pioneer of First Ladies studies. And he had started working on Lady Bird Johnson and the environment at the Johnson Library and had all these male colleagues say, "Don't you think that's a trivial topic to do a book on a First Lady and substance?" And he said, "No, I think history is very male-centric, and you guys need to get over it." So he then taught a course at the University of Texas in 1982, which a very young actress and beautiful woman, Stacy, took. And it changed her life, and it got a lot of attention. Lou Gould said, as soon as he announced he was teaching a course on First Ladies, media was popping up. You know, no one had done that. He's a man teaching a course, a college course on First Ladies. And it didn't hurt that in November of that year, Lady Bird Johnson decides to come visit the class and talk with the class. So this is 1982, and it's really upping the field of First Lady studies. It's getting people very excited. So the then Archivist of the United States, Don Wilson, writes Betty Ford in July of 1983 with an idea that he would like to have some sort of discussion with Betty Ford on a program proposal for a First Ladies Conference at the Ford Museum. And I really love this. Betty Ford was very clear about her feelings with Don. She said, and she wrote him, she said, there needs to be a selling point, some purpose for holding the meeting other than just getting First Ladies together. Should not just be a couple of days of ladies chit-chat. She then decided the topic, which was going to be the first conference ever on First Ladies and their unique contributions, modern First Ladies, private lives, and public duties. Examining their contributions not just in terms of their husband and the many roles they had to balance as a spouse, a mother, and a First Lady. The planners of the conference called the LBJ Library because they wanted to know if Dr. Gould could handle doing the keynote speech. Well, Dr. Gould was very eminent at the University of Texas. He did 500 lecture classes with 500 people all the time. I actually had him for a lecture class. And so we assured him that, yes, he could be the keynote speaker. So the conference was planned, and he was designated the keynote speaker. Betty Ford invited all the living First Ladies. Rosalind Carter and Lady Bird Johnson accepted. Lady Bird Johnson had to back out because she had bronchitis. So the two who convened the conference were Rosalind and Betty Ford. The 4 sessions would concentrate on First Ladies' role in leadership, the First Ladies in media, family life in the White House, and growing up in the White House, to give the full dimensions of being First Lady. In addition to Betty Ford and Rosalind Carter, the panelists included Mrs. Johnson's press secretary, Liz Carpenter, Mary Hoyt, Mrs. Carter's press secretary, and Diane Sawyer, co-host of CBS Morning News, and 2 panels with Lucy Johnson-Turbin, Linda Johnson-Robin, Susan Ford Vance, and Ellen Seagraves, who was Franklin Delano Roosevelt's granddaughter. Betty Ford welcomed and did a keynote speech, as well as Dr. Gould. And I'm going to take the liberty of quoting because, unfortunately, the keynote speeches were not filmed. And so all we have are the written remarks from the keynote speeches. Betty Ford clearly stated the conference goal, saying, "Today we have started a new, and I hope a continuing project. We have set out to look at what the role of a First Lady has been and what direction that role will take for the future. We are the first formed group effort to bring definition to a job that has no job description, but has been shaped by tradition and individual preferences. I hope our 2 days will focus future attention on what just might be one of the most demanding jobs in the federal government, excepting perhaps the job of the First Lady's husband." Gould's keynote address, for which he received a standing ovation, and I communicated with Gould on all of this, he starts by saying, "This conference is particularly timely because the growing scholarly interest in First Ladies. After too long a neglect and no little mystery, students of the presidency and of women's history are recognizing that looking at First Ladies can offer insights and perspectives on many aspects to American history and society." And then in his closing comments, They're very powerful, and he lowered the boom. He said, in the most profound sense, the study of First Ladies holds up a mirror to ourselves. And for this male historian, it has also shown the unstated and often unconscious chauvinism about the achievements of women that permeate our society. History and circumstances make it necessary to evaluate First Ladies as helpmates, appendages, surrogates, and partners of the president. But these categories should not be barriers to seeing presidential wives for what they were and are, autonomous human beings with as much claim to the attention of the student of our history as their masculine counterparts. We will only understand the past of our presidents and ourselves more fully when we grasp it in all its richness. A history that excludes First Ladies or the contributions and lives of women generally will be a record that is limited, false, and wrong. So, the 1984 conference facilitated a time for emerging scholars to meet and share ideas. The planning committee for the conference was very clear, set aside tickets to ensure invitations would include high school students, college students, representatives from universities and colleges in Michigan, selected local, state, national official VIP guests, and the Senate, the Smithsonian, and the National Archives. The conference encouraged books and more examination of the role of First Ladies and their importance and the future field of First Lady study. In my own case, I benefited from the conference because the National Archives was asked to describe where the papers of First Ladies were. Researchers wanted to know, and I was assigned by the archivist to do a book on the papers of First Ladies in the presidential libraries at the Library of Congress. And so we did that book, and it came out with an intro by Dr. Gould and a prologue, and the book is called Modern First Ladies, Their Documentary Legacy. It is now out of date, but it was helpful for a while. Now, enough talk on my part about the conference. I'm like a little girl here. I'm eager and excited to show you portions of the original conference. First time in 40 years. And we have cut and spliced. I have concentrated on Rosalynn and Betty Ford and a few segments with the children who are incredible. I did not include the press because there just wasn't time. This will run 17 minutes long, and I really hope you enjoy it. And thank you, Geyer and Elizabeth at the Ford Library. And let's run it.
America's First Ladies, living in the world's biggest fishbowl. The children of our First Ladies are also a permanent part of our national scrapbook.
Do you remember our city flower? Do you?
Like their mothers, they too command national attention. Yet never before had they come together to share their experiences, to discuss the joys and tensions of an extraordinary responsibility that eventually diminishes but never ends.
Do you have kind of policy aids in addition to the press office and the social office, or is there a kind of policy-making body for the First Lady?
Regular meeting on Monday, and I'm sure every First Lady has at least one weekly meeting to coordinate everything with the complete staff. And policy, as you say, is often, some attempt is made to direct what would be best for the lady of the house to get involved in. And that becomes sometimes an issue between the East Wing and the West Wing.
Well, I knew what I wanted to do when I got to the White House. And in a campaign speech in Bakersfield, California, I said that I was going to ask the president to appoint a commission on mental health. And when Jim was president, I was going to ask him to do that. And then I went home and told him. It was very frustrating at times because the press would cover the first few meetings, and after that they say mental health is not sexy. It's not a sexy issue. People don't like to read about it. And so you have meetings after meetings, and the end of the first year I was described as fuzzy. Nobody knew what I was doing because I was buried in that mental health work, but nobody particularly cared about covering it.
Mrs. Ford.
And it was rather a discussion as to what is the most important, but also what had public appeal. Hopefully you can come interest in something that has both. As you say, mental health wasn't sexy enough for the press to follow it. Maybe a more controversial issue or something is more popular. And that has to be taken into consideration in case, particularly if you have an election coming up. I mean, that's politics. Either that or give whatever you're interested in a twist that's going to appeal to the public.
Would there limits on the amount of time you could call on the president to nudge the agency or the person? I mean, even the first lady, I would assume, can't ask the president to do it too often, or can
It didn't exactly work that way. We would sit on the Truman balcony, or when the weather was bad, in his study, which was next to the bedroom with a nice fireplace in the wintertime. We would talk about what he had done in the day, and then I would talk about what I had done in the day, and I would say, you know, I just want my mental health legislation out of the HHS.
Want it more than anything else.
That's right. If we're going to get the legislation passed and get it implemented, we've got to have it. And so maybe a few days later, he would come home and say, talk to Joe Califano about your mental health legislation.
I think I made the remark in my book, my autobiography, something about there was a lot of pillow talk. And that's sort of what I referred to, not actually pillow talk, but the office of president is a very demanding one, and it's so constantly demanding that you have to take your time when you can get it. And I found it wasn't at breakfast, and it wasn't usually at lunch, but sometimes at dinner or sometimes in the evening we sat by ourselves and talked about the day. And it was those times that you had the opportunity to express your feelings, to, in your own little way, I guess, lobby for what you were interested in. And fortunately, we were pretty much interested in the same things. We agreed a great deal on that. I think I was a sounding board for my husband. I was not that much aware of policy other than what the general policy was, but I think as a sounding board in finding out how the public, the general pulse of the public, and I think that was where I was valuable perhaps to my husband. And I think he was valuable to me in telling me how I should go about getting things done, because I had never been particularly aware of, he hadn't been governor, but you know, I think the background was strictly the being in the House of Representatives, and I hadn't gotten to the administrative level.
One of the perennial questions that comes up, it has to do with influence on the president and the unelected status of the first ladies. I know you probably had that question many times. There are many ways to answer it, but I wondered if you had any general reflections upon, is it a fair kind of question? Is it an appropriate kind of question, or even a useful kind of question? Does it get at real issues, or does it miss some points?
But sometimes I was working really hard trying to get a good mental health program. I was meeting with the counselor to the president on aging lobbying for the legislation, calling the congressman and so forth for him with the legislation, working for Equal Rights Amendment, doing all of these things, and then to have somebody say, well, who elected you? Well, nobody elected me, but I was there. And nobody would have liked it if I had done nothing. And so you just kind of, so what? You do the best you can and don't worry about it. I mean, that was my feeling. You're going to be criticized, it doesn't matter what you do, so you do the best you can. But you got those questions, didn't you?
Oh, definitely, criticism and so forth. But I think when you're in politics, before you ever reach the office of the White House, which is highest office, you have probably developed, you've had a lot of those too as far as other things, and you have to develop a hard shell, and unless you have a hard enough shell to believe in yourself and go ahead with your own your own priorities that you believe in, and you have to firmly believe in them enough that no matter what anyone says, that's not going to make you lose faith. You think it through pretty carefully first because you know it's not all going to be a bed of roses. So before you ever take a stand on an issue, you try to think it through pretty carefully.
What would you find were the most rewarding things that you got to do as First Ladies, and what were the least rewarding aspects of being the First Lady, or things that nagged or frustrated or sometimes aggravated you about the position?
Well, I enjoyed meeting people from the heads of states from around the world. That was exciting, and to get to know them and know their problems and the things that concerned and involved them. I enjoyed being in the White House where important decisions are made every day, and being a little bit knowledgeable about what was going on. Being able to sit in a cabinet meeting and hear the talk about the decisions that affected the lives of the people of our country. That was thrilling to me. And the hardest thing was reading the morning newspaper.
Well, I probably would have said the hardest thing, and I reversed myself, so I pick up on yours, was perhaps trying to make the press understand what you were doing. And that's reading the morning newspaper. So we both, and I think almost every first family finds this, no matter how good a job you seem to feel that you are the preparation, you're trying to give them all the facts and whatnot, but something always slips in there and it gets misrepresented, and you can be quite disappointed. Sometimes you can be very, very pleased about it. I think the thing that I enjoyed probably, and it's hard to say, there were so many good things about it, such as meeting the people from all over the world, and the state arrivals and the excitement of them coming, and the interchange of travel in other countries, and all the tremendous advantages that you just could never have in any other position. But I also think that the ability to have my husband working nearby where I could look over and I knew that he was there. Now, I knew I couldn't disturb him, but if I really needed him, I could walk over there to the Oval Office in an emergency, in a crisis, and he was nearby because we had been separated a great deal in our lives. He'd be out of town a lot or not be available. And I felt a real sense of security just in the fact that we were in the same territory, and that was probably one of the nicest feelings, and we saw more of each other there than any other time in our marriage.
Are there any other reflections that you have as we've discussed and talked in the last several days that you'd like to impart about the experience that you've shared, or things that have come to your mind as we've talked that you might want to help us conclude with?
It was a wonderful experience. The White House was home, the second and third floor. We had our children there. We had been separated from our children for so long. All but one of our sons and his wife could not live there. And everybody as I said before, in the family, has the same experiences when they go out. So you treasure those times together, and a real warm, close family feeling. And the criticisms come. And so you develop that attitude in the White House. All of these things are going on around you. You're doing the best job you can do. And besides that, you think you're doing a good job and what's best for the country. And all of the hubbub is going on. But you're secure if you're confident in what you're doing. And that's the way I felt in the White House.
I just feel that if people could understand sometimes when the criticism of women who are trying to do their very best in that position in the White House and had a little more basic understanding and a little more patience to see how things are going to move along, because they move differently every month or so. I'm unhappy reading a lot of criticism and real nasty things about women who are trying their best. They did not choose to run for the office. Just like the children, I feel very strongly as a mother, I'm very defensive. And when they write about the first family, I think it's fine perhaps to write about the president and maybe the First Lady because she has her programs, but I am particularly partial as far as children in the White House, and we've all had our share of it. I hope that with seminars like this, there'll be an understanding more about what goes on there, and the public will perhaps not be quite so critical. We're all trying to do our best. Maybe they don't agree with us.
For nearly 200 years, this building has been everything from an international symbol of power to a nursery. A president and his wife have chosen to live here, but their children have often found that it is not the easiest place in the world to grow up.
I clearly remember when I was in school the picture of David Eisenhower having his polio shot. And I remember that then we all had to line up for our polio shots. I mean, David had had his. How did you like, Lucy, being a role model, being an example for all these other teenagers when you were doing things like Watussing all over the world?
I fought that a lot. I fought being the role model. I fought being in the public view. I resented a lot about the White House. And then I realized that my motto needed to be, I can adjust or I can adjust. Those are all my alternatives. So I tried to be the best me I could be.
I wore blue jeans, and that was big time. The press made a big deal about it, and I thought, I consider that normal or real. We kind of laid a few guidelines down, like you don't wear them through receptions and things of that nature. But it's hard to be a role model, and you're going to get criticized no matter what you do.
Well, that goes into the question we talked about earlier. In this day of labels and images, how were you labeled by the press, and what are you really like, Susan?
I think probably the biggest change is at that time, I really didn't know who I was. I was tugged and pulled and attended a lot of receptions and did how many parades and ribbon cuttings, and after it was all over with, I sat back and I thought, who am I? And that took several years to cope with and deal with and get into myself, because I had grown up as President Ford's daughter. It was a confusing time, but I'm glad I did it. I walked into cabinet meetings and would ask for my allowance because my mother didn't have any money on it. Those are the things that help you make it through each and every day.
When I was in the White House, Lady Bird said to me on so many occasions, enjoy, enjoy, and which is what you have said, I think, Lucy. And I think that is good advice, to enjoy your time there. I think that if I were advising someone, I would also say be very confident about what you want to do and about what you're doing, and decide that the things that you're going to do are good and best for the country, and then don't worry about what anybody says about it. if you can accept that and do that, you'll have an enjoyable time in the White House.
Then you can enjoy it.
That's right. Then you can enjoy it.
I'm delighted with the results of the conference this weekend. I think that it's opened doors for us to look at ourselves and for the public to look more deeply within the responsibilities and the lives of the people that live in the White House.
Also, one thing that I think has been so helpful in this is to share experiences with other First Family members. Talking about it openly and among ourselves also has hopefully will make people see that First Families are normal human beings.
I hope they realize we're warm and we're human and we're just another family.
That was terrific. And I loved your fuzzy sweater at the beginning. I will say, I need to find myself one of those. But thank you for pulling that all together, Nancy. It's just really refreshing to hear these women come together, speaking about their experiences in such a refreshing way. And I couldn't help but take away the two C's that kept coming up was criticism and confidence. And I think that I would love, Susan, for you to speak about this because, I know that you have that confidence level, but did you feel that in the White House? The criticism and or the confidence?
No, I didn't. You have to remember, Brooke, I was 17. Mm-hmm. So let's put it in perspective. I was a senior in high school. I no more wanted to be there than the man in the moon. I wanted to be a normal senior in high school, experiencing life like most kids did as a teenager. I have a 17-year-old granddaughter. And so to look at her now and what she's experiencing compared to what I experienced is so very different. Mm-hmm. Confidence, I don't know many 17-year-olds that have a lot of confidence. And when I said I didn't know who I was, I didn't. Mm-hmm. When that was done in 1984, I was married, had a 3-year-old and a 15-month-old at the time. I can't believe I could talk. I was trying to rack my brain when I heard about it. I was like, who is taking care of my kids? Because I wasn't home. But no, and I don't think you gain a lot of confidence in the White House. Mm-hmm. You gain a lot of criticism. Mm-hmm. I can still tell you to this day about an article that was written in the Washington Post about me graduating from high school, and that the reason I graduated from high school was because of who my father was, and it was not because of my grades. I never was a straight A student. Mike was the straight A student. I was the BC student. And it was one of the most hurtful, painful things to do to a 17-year-old kid. Mm. And those are the things, yes, I have lovely, happy memories of the White House. Trip to China, meeting Mao Zedong, and things like that were incredible. But there's also this criticism that is really hurtful. And if you don't have a heart, I would go to my dad and I'd go, but that's not true. And he'd go, Susan, we're not going to draw any more attention to it. Mm. Let it go. The more attention you draw to it, the longer it stays in the media. Mm. And so my dad was a huge proponent and teacher to me of how to handle it.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's terrific. So looking at this 40 years later,
almost 50.
Almost 50. Well, 40 years since the conference, 50 years. Yeah. Yes, but you're absolutely right. We've got all these advances in technology now. It seems even more prevalent now in terms of criticism. And so, how have you noticed this? How would you describe it differently now versus then in terms of how the first children are seen in the press?
Well, I think the mothers of these children, or the parents, have become extremely more protective of these children because of social media. Mm-hmm. Thank God there wasn't social media when I was there. I would have been in a lot of trouble. You have to remember, I'm the last of 4, and they were really tired by the time I came along. Mother always said, don't criticize my kids, don't pick on my kids. They didn't ask to be here. My brother Mike was in divinity school. My brother Jack was in college. Steve took off and became a cowboy and went to Montana to chase cattle. Mm-hmm. And I needed to finish high school. And then I went to Mount Vernon College in Washington for a couple years so that I could continue to participate in some of the White House stuff, because I knew there was no guarantee we were going to win the election and we were going to get 4 more years. And then I went on to the University of Kansas. So there were things I wanted to experience. The state dinners were amazing. The heads of state that you get to meet. The weekends at Camp David were, the Carters, I've seen more of that footage, and the Carters went almost every weekend. I don't blame them to get out of the limelight and get some of the focus, off of you. But I do feel like I had a somewhat normal, I went to UVA, I went to fraternity parties, I did those things. And that's where
Georgetown.
And I went to Georgetown. I drank underage. What a surprise. Those things were normal. Mm-hmm. But if I would have had the social media component, it would not have been, I probably wouldn't have stuck around. I would have changed schools sooner.
So during the 1984 conference, Liz Carpenter did say, and it's not part of this video footage, so if you want the video footage of this, I know an audiovisual archivist that can help hook you up. But she said that I think strong first ladies make news, people salute them, even if we don't agree with them. How did you see this at play in your own mother's story? Do you think it has changed or evolved?
I think, if anything, it's gotten better. Yes, Betty Ford was hailed for her breast cancer and what she did, and we've already talked about that. And she continued her legacy, yes, with talking about substance use disorder and all of that, and creating the Betty Ford Center and now the Hazelton Betty Ford Foundation. But she continued to do things to stay and use her platform. Mm-hmm. She was an interesting person. Mm-hmm. She did books. She did 3 books. And so that continued to put her in the limelight and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. She continued to do articles. I sent you the one from Ladies' Home Journal recently when she turned 60, and I went, that's what you look like when you turn 60? I'm 66. So, that was kind of fun to look at. So I think you can choose or not choose to continue the limelight, be in and out. I worked with Mrs. Carter on her mental health journalism board, which was fascinating. And I look at what my mother and Mrs. Carter did as far as going up on Capitol Hill and getting involved in parody and getting parody passed. Took a long time, but they went and knocked on doors. Mm-hmm. But those are things that were important to them, and they wanted to make a difference for women. Mm-hmm. I look at what Dr. Biden is doing now with the whole women and medical and research. It's so important. Mm-hmm. And it's almost a continuation of what Betty Ford and Rosalind Carter started. She's still fighting for women. Why are we still having to fight for women? Yeah. That I don't get.
It's a terrific question.
Next conference.
Yes. Well, and then speaking of fighting for women, your mother was actively involved in ERA, and I guess I'm not sure what you were able to do, or how, if you took that mantle up in some way. I know you were only 17, but what was that like for you to see her so active in proclaiming women's rights, and also were you able to join in with that in some way?
I did, to some degree. You also have to remember, as Lisa said, my mother was raised by a single woman. Mm-hmm. My mother had 2 older brothers. I had 3 older brothers. We women fought hard in our family. So we were pretty male-oriented. And so there is a picture of me somewhere when Tyne was a baby, and I would say 1, with a bonnet on, and both of us at an ERA protest in Washington. So when I had young children, I was very focused on staying home and being a mom and that sort of thing. And I didn't get involved in the breast cancer movement until Heather was 2. So that would have been 1985, 86-ish. Because I wanted to stay home and be a mom. And I didn't want to just be a housewife. Right. I wanted to be a mom. That's what I always wanted to be. So I felt my career was perfectly fine until I decided to get involved in the breast cancer events. And I did get involved in some of the equal rights, but then it died off for a while. And now it's starting to come back. And I've told all of them, call me. And I have 2 daughters that would really like to get involved in it. So, yeah, I mean, I'm open to doing stuff like that and making a difference.
I hope people are listening. So during the conference, too, Linda Bird Johnson Robb said, just as our parents have influenced us, I think to some extent, particularly as adults, we do influence our parents. How do you feel you influenced your parents?
I think all 4 of us children influenced our parents in staying young and active and open-minded. Also in that 60 Minutes interview, my mother talks about, I know some of my children have used marijuana, which back then was shocking. And yes, she did say I wouldn't be surprised if my daughter didn't have an affair. Well, one of the issues, and I continue to bring this up, is can we define the word affair? My mother's definition of an affair was premarital sex. My definition of an affair was having sex with a married man. I was like, no, that's not happening. So, you know, some terms get misconstrued, not defined, all of those things. But I think us boys, and my brothers and I, kept my parents very in touch with what was going on with the world. And, you know, you really need to come around to this or whatever. And a classic example, my daughter will probably shoot me for telling this story, and I won't say which one it was, but we were all home in Palm Springs, and my brothers, their uncles, were giving one of my daughters a hard time for living with her then boyfriend, soon to be fiance. And my mother just put her foot down and just was like, no, you don't. She has every right to make that choice by herself. And she really stood up for my daughters. And she always stood up for my daughters, and or all of her granddaughters, I should say. And it was all about choice. I mean, she got involved in the whole abortion thing. She was not popular with the Republican Party. And she would be mortified today to know that it's not legal to get an abortion. That was so important to her. Just allow us to choose. Whatever it is, choose.
This is why I love Betty Ford. I could just listen to this forever. And I think that that's why even your father said things like her legacy would probably be the far more impactful one than his even. And, you know, just, you know, his humbleness at play right there. But it's also to credit your mother. Absolutely. I have one more question for you before we turn it to Stacy, but also during the conference, Lucy Baines Johnson said the following: I had a chance to be an eyewitness to history even when I didn't want to be. I had a chance to grow in ways I didn't know I could. And so I'd like to just hear you reflect back on your time in the White House and since, and how being that eyewitness to history was for you.
No, it's very true. When you are an eyewitness to history, and Lucy and I were similar in age when her dad, during her dad's administration, she was at National Cathedral School. But we were similar in age. And, you know, I remember the Mayaguez. I remember the pardon. I remember all of those things. I remember people being up all night in the family area, going over discussions and things like that, and making decisions. And, you know, not very many people can say they experienced that. Did I appreciate it then? No. I have learned to appreciate it now as I have gotten older. Just to look at the old pictures of Rummy and Dick Cheney and stuff like that, I'm like, you all were such babies. But, you know, those are the things that you get to experience, the people you get to meet, the heads of state, the celebrities you get to meet. When I heard Robert Redford was in the White House, I was like, Dad said, well, just come over to the office. And I said, I got to get out of my school uniform. I am not going to meet him in my school uniform. So, I mean, there are things like that that are very impressive to a 17-year-old kid. You know, when I look back at it now, I kind of laugh at myself and just go, wow, girl. You made some major mistakes, but it's okay. But you get judged. So the choice is, I'm going to do what I want to do, because you're going to get judged no matter what you do.
Well, that is an excellent stopping point and a correlation to what we just watched as well. So thank you so much, Susan.
Thanks, Brooke.
So we're going to turn it over to Stacy at this point, who has a prepared remark for us.
Good afternoon, everyone. My task is to provide a brief history of the birth and trajectory of the field of First Lady Studies. Spoiler alert, the field is flourishing today. So let's see how we got here. As an academic endeavor, First Lady Studies began in the early 1980s. That was when political historian Louis L. Gould, while researching the 1912 election, came to understand the influence and the power of First Ladies, both in their husbands' administrations and in our public life, in a very different way. Now, Gould was already a prestigious historian, a well-known scholar and author of several books. But his dawning awareness brought about a wholesale rethink of his own research, analysis, and writing. And his intellectual curiosity drove him to create the first class offered anywhere on the planet on the history of First Ladies in the fall of 1982 at the University of Texas. I was in that class, and it did change my life. Dr. Gould moved beyond the entrenched male-centered paradigm of that era to teach about First Ladies as women of intellect and action. It was revelatory. Dr. Gould sent all of us students out into the various archives for our research paper topic, and I was lucky enough to study the professional relationship between Eleanor Roosevelt and a famous Texan named Anna Pennybacker. In the process, I turned up about a couple hundred letters between Pennybacker and Roosevelt. And thanks to Dr. Gould, I got on an airplane and flew to the Hyde Park Franklin Delano Roosevelt Presidential Library to hand carry copies to them, where they told me they had not yet begun to catalog Eleanor's papers. Hands down, as Nancy suggested, the most memorable day in that class of Dr. Gould's was the day that Lady Bird Johnson came. She arrived with her Secret Service detail and what felt like an army of cameramen and journalists. That course kicked off a long-lasting media interest in Dr. Gould, in the class, and in the topic most of all. Then, 2 years later, as we all know now, the next big development in the field of First Lady Studies was the public imprimatur that it gained from Mrs. Ford at her 1984 conference here in Grand Rapids. These two events created a sea change in the way we think about and discuss First Ladies, both in the past and in the present day, both by academics and by the public. There are many ways to measure the rising interest in First Lady Studies since then, but as time is limited, I must be very selective. So, in the mid-1980s, a couple years after Dr. Gould's class, a quartet of important books laid a foundation for the field. First Ladies by historian Betty Boyd Caroli, Presidential Wives by American Studies scholar Paul Bowler, and The President's Partner by communications expert Myra Gooden. The fourth book was different. That's the one Nancy made reference to. So Nancy Kegan Smith and Mary Ryan edited Modern First Ladies, their documentary legacy. This book spelled out why archival documents should be located, cataloged, and made available to researchers so that we could deepen and in some cases begin the critical task of actually figuring out what it was that First Ladies did. Further spurring interest then were books and memoirs written by First Ladies and those in their circle. Now, Helen Taft and Eleanor Roosevelt, Lady Bird Johnson, Betty Ford, and others had published memoirs before 1982, but the trend accelerated in this time. In the 1980s, Mrs. Ford wrote a second book, and Rosalind Carter and Nancy Reagan published 2 books apiece. Mrs. Reagan's chief of staff, James Rosebush, wrote First Lady, Public Wife, for example, in 1988. It was just one in a line of fascinating insider stories. The 1990s was a rich decade. Scholarly articles based upon archival research began to appear in journals like Presidential Studies Quarterly. Author Carl Anthony published First Ladies, The Saga of the President's Wives and Their Power, 2 ambitious volumes over 1,000 pages, written as a kind of temporally layered multi-biography of all the First Ladies together. Then came the first of what would be a landmark 3-volume biography of Eleanor Roosevelt by historian Blanche Wiesen Cook. 3 volumes. There are United States presidents who don't have 3-volume biographies. To think that a First Lady, even Eleanor Roosevelt, could be worthy of 3 volumes and that it was published by a major trade press, that was huge. That was an enormous step forward in public and academic acceptance. Also, early in the 1990s, Lewis Gould noticed that while interest in First Ladies was increasing, we lacked a single dependable reference work detailing their achievements. So he sought exemplary scholars in different fields, and it's true he sometimes had to convince them to enter this burgeoning field by writing lengthy biographical sketches for his path-breaking 1996 compilation, American First Ladies, Their Lives and Their Legacy. The authors included Jean Baker, Alida Black, Patricia Brady, Myra Gutten, Christy Miller, Holly Schulman, and Nancy Beck Young, all of whom have gone on to publish important work in First Lady studies, and most of them have Dr. Gould to thank for getting them started. Building upon this, in 1999, Dr. Gould launched his Modern First Ladies book series, published by the University Press of Kansas. It is impossible to overstate the importance of this book series. His Lady Bird Johnson, Our Environmental First Lady, was the first to appear. It was based on extensive archival research and concentrated on Mrs. Johnson's environmental work. It was really the first book focused on a First Lady's substantive policy issue rather than a biographical treatment. It became the model for the series, 17 books covering Edith Roosevelt all the way through Hillary Clinton, for which Dr. Gould again broadened the field of scholars by inviting academics from very different disciplines. I'm happy to report that Jill Hummer and Catherine Sibley are currently completing books on Laura Bush and Michelle Obama, respectively, to continue that series. Still in the rich 1990s, another important marker of increased interest appeared when the National First Ladies Library opened at the Ida Saxton McKinley birthplace in Canton, Ohio. Led by Mary Regula, the National First Ladies Library reached a broad public audience through the biographical overviews and the extensive bibliography on their website. Also reaching an arguably larger public audience was the brilliant redesign of the Smithsonian Museum's First Ladies Dress exhibit. The new curator, Edith Mayo, refocused the popular collection on First Ladies' achievements and not solely on their dresses. Then, as the 21st century opened, historian Catherine Allgore's trailblazing book, Parlor Politics, made us all reconsider and redefine power as utilized by America's founding mothers. Allgore's work has positively shaped the amazing new books that poured out in the 2000s by wonderful scholars like Patricia Brady, Joseph Ellis, Amy Greenberg, Robert Watson, Catherine Clinton, Catherine Sibley, Christy Miller, Lewis Gould, Nancy Beck Young, Barbara Perry, Myra Gutten, Maureen Beasley, Molly Wertheimer, among others. That was some decade of scholarship. Now, not long after that first university class, interest spread well beyond the academy, with children's books, novels, including one by James Patterson called The First Lady, and books by journalists such as Cokie Roberts, Rebecca Boggs Roberts, Lisa McCubbin Hill, and Kate Anderson Brower. Journalists who write books about living first ladies based upon interviews with those who knew them are an important interpretive first wave and very useful for scholars. I'm thinking here of Carl Bernstein on Hillary Clinton, Ronald Kessler on Laura Bush, Peter Slevin on Michelle Obama, for example. Susan Page interviewed Barbara Bush, and Darlene Superville interviewed Jill Biden for their books, but first ladies often seem to decline interviews, especially when they have their own memoirs to pen. So in 1994, Barbara Bush published hers. In the 2000s, Hillary Clinton, Barbara Bush, Laura Bush, Michelle Obama, and Jill Biden have all written one or more books. These later first ladies have been more forthcoming about the substance of their work. Possibly they feel they're being taken more seriously because of the growth of the field and our era. I want to remind us very briefly here that another marker of heightened interest in First Lady studies is their increasing appearance in the media, live, fictional, and documentary. These, of course, are always of varying qualities and levels of historical accuracy. Scholars know that First Ladies have had a long history with non-print media dating back to early radio broadcasts and television shows, but only sporadically. Over time, their presence has increased. One long tradition began in 1969 with Pat Nixon's appearance on Sesame Street. Every First Lady from Nixon when the TV show started to Jill Biden has been on Sesame Street, except for Melania Trump. In the mid-1980s, Nancy Reagan really helped push First Lady television appearances into the norm. The camera loved her, and she was very much at ease in front of it because of her past as an actor. So Americans got used to seeing the First Lady on shows like Good Morning America in different strokes. An important first occurred on November 17, 2001, when Laura Bush became the first First Lady to deliver the presidential radio address. She spoke on the plight of Afghani women. This matters because when the West Wing takes the First Lady seriously, the rest of us take note. Fast forward to Michelle Obama and the era of ubiquitous social media. Obama was the first First Lady to send a tweet and the first to write an ongoing blog. And who can forget carpool karaoke with James Corden or the evolution of the mom dance with Jimmy Fallon? Of the many other media events I could mention, I want to name only two. C-SPAN's First Lady's Influence and Image aired in 2013 and 2014. It brought together pairs of experts to discuss every First Lady with moderator Susan Swain. And this was so popular, this show was so popular, that C-SPAN later published these really well-crafted interviews. 3 years later, the Smithsonian Channel released First Ladies Revealed, blending commentary by scholars and journalists with contemporary footage and dramatization to critical acclaim. Now I want to turn to four very recent indicators of the health of the field. First, in 2011, American University put its prestige and heft behind the creation of its First Ladies Initiative, and it added both status and star power when it made Anita McBride its director. The First Ladies Initiative publicizes the work and legacies of presidential spouses, chiefly with conferences and a lecture series, for which so far 4 former First Ladies have spoken. Second, in 2021, several First Lady scholars, archivists, and former White House employees came together to create FLAIR, which stands for the First Ladies Association for Research and Education. Its mission is to promote, study, and amplify First Ladies. Each of you should join FLAIR immediately. You can do that on your phone right now. Third, East Wing magazine began publication this year. Founded by journalist Jennifer Taylor, East Wing is an online periodical, and you should all subscribe to that. East Wing, according to Taylor, quote, is the first journalistic-driven publication dedicated to covering presidential First Ladies, present and past. And it's terrific. Fourth, we finally have a textbook. Just out. United States First Ladies, Making History and Leaving Legacies by Diana Carlin, Anita McBride, and Nancy Kegan Smith. For those of us who teach First Ladies, it's a wonderful thing to have a book devoted to the college audience. But Carlin, McBride, and Smith have also brought out a version for the general public entitled Remember the First Ladies, The Legacies of History-Making Women. This brief catalog of mine has attempted to chronicle the increasing interest in First Lady studies. The field really is flourishing. But the world is changing, and so must we. Each of our 4 21st century First Ladies has moved us away from the traditional conception of the position. Laura Bush's role during 9/11 and her advocacy of Afghani women pushed past the work of earlier wartime First Ladies. Michelle Obama, of course, was America's first Black First Lady. This is no small thing. Melania Trump lived out the role in a wholly unique and idiosyncratic way. And Dr. Jill Biden is the first First Lady to maintain her career while fulfilling the conventional obligations of a First Lady. Thanks to them, the First Lady is finally more than simply a lagging indicator of the gendered expectations of our society. And so, to the future, 4 suggestions to conclude. 1, archival research remains essential. Thus, presidential libraries, the Library of Congress, and other archives must prioritize the accessibility of First Ladies' papers, and this also means digitization. 2, every author of every new book on First Ladies, regardless of their background, must begin by reading the extensive literature on the topic and mastering First Ladies' historiography so that the field moves away from endlessly repeating canards, cliches, and gossip. 3rd, the basic work of chronicling and describing is mostly done, so it's time now to engage in deeper analysis and to place First Ladies in the larger context of presidential studies and United States history generally. 4th, we must ready ourselves for the appearance of a first partner who does not meet the traditional mold. To begin, we might start by studying another field pioneered by Dr. Gould, gubernatorial spouses. There would be relevant comparisons if we analyzed the spouses of the almost 50 female governors of our history. 40 years ago, our field gained a matchless visibility and vitality right here in Michigan at the 1984 First Ladies Symposium. I cannot wait to see what will happen as a result of this 2024 conference. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I know we're running a little low on time, but I do want to ask a final question of all of you, especially given what Stacy just, said in terms of like where we are and where the future could go. Where do you hope the future goes? Nancy, Susan, and Stacy.
I hope that it continues and that the First Ladies continue to do vital things. We did not mention one of the new developments, which is their foundations that empower Barbara Bush's foundation, $100 million for literacy, Mrs. Johnson's Wildflower Foundation, $6 million for wildflower. So that's another new development. And I'm thinking you're saying, would we like to have a man? And certainly. Yeah. That would be lovely to have, and what role that person would follow, and to see a First Lady as the first female president. Mm-hmm.
I just hope that they continue to break the barriers and move forward in whatever way is best for the country and themselves.
Mm-hmm. Great.
I agree, and I would like to see Americans in general give more credit to First Ladies and pay more attention to the work that they do in and of itself.
Yes. I mean, I've got to say, with what all of us have said all day, that is so important. We're taking baby steps, but history is not filled out robustly on this issue at all. Mm-hmm. And there still needs to be research done and factually documenting the incredible efforts that these First Ladies have done. And I will just say, when we were writing our book, 3 First Ladies scholars, we would find things that we didn't even know and it just keeps evolving, you know, that you're really surprised about. So do not think the story is over. It's continuing, and we would like it to be robust.
Perfect. Well, I'm going to invite Gleaves up to do a conclusion with you, but while he does that, I do want to just do quick housekeeping just to say that Nancy, Anita, Diana had to leave, and Lisa will be outside signing books once we conclude here. So if you'd like to get some books signed, we hope you will take advantage of that. So Gleaves.
Thank you so much. I'm not sure whether this is on or not. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Well, I'm holding the pamphlet that was issued, the program, in 1984, and I've studied it many times as we've prepared for today. And I can't help but think, as I channel all of the interesting speakers who are in this publication, that they would be smiling on what has taken place this afternoon. I think there was something for the head, the heart, and the feet in the presentations. The head, because we just heard, for example, a historiographic overview of all the great progress that's going on with the First Ladies. The heart, was we just heard about what the impact of what it's like to be a family member in the White House, really at a tough time in this stage of life. And the feet, because I got to tell you, when I listen to all the stories I've heard all day, both at the luncheon and today, it makes me want to do more, to get out there and serve, because the women and the families who've been in the extraordinary role have done so much for our country that has been unheralded and so much behind the scenes. And I feel like a piker compared to them. I want to change that. So yes, my feet too. I want to thank our partners again. I mean, the National Archives, you know, Brooke with the Library and Museum, Joel, always just wonderful to work with. It's a joy to get to know a new partner in an American university. And Flair, of course, as I revealed at lunch, is just one of the favorite partners ever. Just so much fun to work with you all. We really appreciate it.
You were wonderful to work with.
Well, and that's a tribute. This is the last thing I wanted to say. You know, to put on any kind of a day like this takes a lot of great staff. And I want to thank the library and museum staff for all they did to make today such a success. I also want to thank the foundation staff. Rachel Siglo deserves a standing ovation.
Yay, Rachel.
Here we go. Ellen did it. So, and I'm already on my feet, Ellen, so thank you. That's right. Thanks, Ellen. Mary Eileen's doing it too. So, and I just want to say at the very end here, I think we ought to do something like this again, right?
Yes.
Let's keep this going. Thank you very much.
Great.
Did you want to say something?
I mean, Gleaves, you said it all. I would say it's been a pleasure. I would say go forth, research, educate, find out more. Find out all these wonderful stories about these incredibly strong women. And one thing that I think is really interesting is a journalist said, these men really picked well.
Yeah.
I mean, they really did. Most of these women did not want to be in this position, and my God, they took on the mantle, and they did so many substantive things in a role that's unelected, has no role book, has no definition, and they did it incredibly for our nation and led on so many key issues like ERA. We haven't even mentioned civil rights. We haven't mentioned everything that they did in terms of leading society, in terms of creating bipartisan entertaining like Dolly Madison did. So please keep going and make this story as fulsome part of our American history and story as possible.
Thank you.
And thank you to our panelists here. Give them a round of applause, please. Yes.
Great, great panel.
Yes, it was terrific.
Enjoy the whole day. Thanks to everybody. Drive home safely.